affect political party affiliation in light of the upcoming election in November and our daily life observations on how youth view politics compared to adults. So, after lots of research, we came up with a hypothesis that the Democratic Party support will increase as the American youth reaches voting age due to liberal mindsets in the American youth and growing minority populations in America. As we worked towards our hypothesis, Katie and I came across a variety of information that influenced our view on the topic. First off, something we found really interesting is that the Pew Research Center, a deep dive into party affiliation, sharp differences by race, gender, generation, and education, showed that race and ethnicity have a really large impact on political party affiliation, and that minorities tend to support both the Democratic and Independent parties instead of the Republican Party, as well as the fact that younger generations tend to lean more democratically than their predecessors, especially the silent generation and earlier generations. Also, Ada Just, an associate professor of political science at Bilkent University in Turkey, wrote that ethnic groups tend to stick together and support their group's goals, especially in times when information is short or they perceive a lack of equal opportunity in their society. And some members of ethnic groups even vote for a party with more ethnic officials simply because they feel more represented. And this is a concept that Katie and I attributed to social interest, a psychological concept, where you can relate to the sameness you share with someone else, and that creates a sense of belongingness. Something else we believe should be taken into account as we continued our research is the increasing immigration in the US. In recent years, the proportion of US children who are immigrants has grown, with most of that increase coming from second-generation immigrants, according to the US Census Bureau. This percentage has gone up 9% from 1994 to 2017 and is projected to continue rising, which we believed would have an impact on political party affiliation in the US. And going back to research from Ada Just, second-generation immigrants feel more entitled to equal treatment than their foreign-born parents, seeing as they are born in the host country, and they therefore become more involved in politics and society than their foreign-born parents. Finally, the last bit of background research that we found extremely important towards our topic is the changing demographics in America. Even though minorities have typically been found to vote Democrat, this hasn't had as much of an impact as it could due to the fact that non-Hispanic whites control the political sphere, with the largest percentage of these non-Hispanic whites affiliating with the Republican Party, according to Frank Newport, a senior scientist with a doctorate in sociology. Additionally, Kevin Pollard and William O'Hare, which are senior demographers for the O'Hare Data and Demographic Services, LLC, have found that by the middle of the 21st century, non-Hispanic whites will make up a slim and fading majority of Americans. So, seeing this data, we believe, compared to the fact that no demographic factors such as gender, age, religion, or education, etc., was as strong as determining support in race, we were able to form our hypothesis that the support for the Democratic Party will begin to increase. When it came to gather data of our own, Katie and I decided to use an anonymous online survey as our research method. Within our survey, we included a consent form as we were going to be studying minors, and we started off our survey with demographic identifier questions, including ethnicity, religion, and region, as well as a political party affiliation identifier question to see what party our participants believed they aligned with. Then after that, we had a qualifier question of never having voted before, as we wanted to analyze future trends and not people who had already contributed to the political climate in America. Katie and I then created a list of 24 political party affiliation questions based off of Pew Research typology quizzes in order to confirm that our participants truly aligned with the political party that they chose due to political ideology. Then it took us a lot of time to come up with a method to score our questions, but we decided to go with a Likert scale because of the 1 through 4 scale. There is no opportunity to stay neutral, so we could better group our participants into separate categories. We had a list of 24 questions, 12 of which aligned with Democrat ideology and 12 of Republican ideology, and participants can answer strongly agree, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. We assigned point values based on whether the question was a Democratic identifier or Republican identifier, with a strongly agree for Democratic questions being a 4, agree a 3, disagree a 2, strongly agree a 1, and then Republican identifier questions, strongly agree a 1, agree a 2, disagree a 3, and strongly disagree. We then added up the scores for each participant and grouped them into separate categories based on their final score, with the Republican group being 24 to 42 points, meaning they had the greatest amount of strongly disagree Democrat questions and strongly agree Republican identifier questions. Then Republican leaning was 43 through 60 points for a mix of strongly agree, strongly disagree, and disagree questions democratically, and the greatest amount of Republican strongly agree and agree questions. Then we had our Democrat leaning group, 61 through 78 points for a greater amount of agree and strongly agree Democratic questions, and a greater amount of disagree and strongly disagree for the Republican questions. And then finally, our Democrat group, which was 79 through 96 points, with the greatest strongly agree and agree Democratic questions and strongly disagree and disagree Republican. These were our results for our Democratic or Democratic leaning participants. 100% of our African American and Asian/Asian American participants were in the Democratic or Democratic leaning groups. 80.7% of our Caucasian and white participants were in this group. 69.2% of our Hispanic and Latinx participants, 60% of our Middle Eastern, and 0% of our Hawaiian Native and Pacific Islander participants. Then for our Republican and Republican leaning participants, we had 0% of our Asian American and African American participants falling in this group, 19.3% of our Caucasian or white participants, 30.8% of our Hispanic or Latinx participants, 40% of our Middle Eastern participants, and 100% of our Hawaiian Native/Pacific Islander participants. So something we found really interesting in this throughout our research is that although we had 22 participants note themselves as Republican in the preliminary political affiliation question, only 18 actually aligned with Republican ideology following those 24 identifier questions using actual political ideology. The largest group of Republican and Republican-leaning participants were actually in the Caucasian/white category, but based on our sample size, that doesn't show as well in this graph. This is our results for our total number of participants based on their ethnicity, with 5 African American participants, 7 Asian/Asian American participants, 57 Caucasian white participants, 13 Hispanic/Latinx participants, 5 Middle Eastern participants, and 1 Hawaiian/Pacific Islander. Here are our results for our participants based on region, ethnicity, and religion, which were our other demographic identifiers that we used. Regardless of region, most of our participants aligned with democratic ideals, but the majority of our participants did come from the South, as we are based in South Florida, with 54 out of 70 participants from the South leaning Democrat, 7 out of 7 from the Midwest, and 7 out of 8 from the Northwest leaning Democrat. Our religious groups were mixed. However, only 7 out of 24 Christian and Catholics were Republican, and 7 out of 40 Jewish participants were Republican. The ethnicity grouping was the one that showed the most correlation to political affiliation, with the data showing minorities such as African Americans and Asian Americans all aligning with Democrat or Democrat-leaning ideals. We attributed this move towards the Democrat grouping based on our liberal social views questions, some of which are seen on this slide. And we saw that liberal social views are shared between the majority of participants regardless of political affiliation. 94.4% of participants either strongly agreed or agreed that environmental law should be a priority, which tends to be a democratic point of view. 87.5% of participants believed that abortion should be legal in all cases. 90.9% of participants believed that homosexuality should be accepted the same way as heterosexuality is in society. And overall, 18 out of 87 of participants aligned as either Republican or Republican-leaning, an approximate 20.7%. However, a large amount of those participants actually agreed with democratic ideals in terms of liberal social views, illustrating that the American youth appears to share these liberal social views regardless of their political party affiliation. So we concluded from our research that the next political trend will have more democratic citizens due to the rise in minorities and more liberal mindsets in American youth. Our data ended up showing that religion and region do not have a major effect on political party affiliation, as the results varied widely for both categories, but we also did not have the largest sample size due to our location and our high school setting, which didn't allow us to leave the survey open for much time or disseminate it as widely as we wished we could have. Then our ethnicity grouping showed there was a strong correlation to political affiliation, with the data showing that minorities such as African Americans and Asian Americans all aligned with Democratic or Democratic-leaning ideals, and the other minorities almost entirely aligned with Democratic ideals, except for our Hawaiian Native/Pacific Islander group, which actually only had one participant, unfortunately, so we couldn't have extensive data in that category. Then, one of our most interesting conclusions is that many participants who marked themselves as Republican in the preliminary identifier questions actually aligned with many liberal social views, which caused their score from the survey to push them into the Democrat-leaning group, which we attributed to these liberal social views. And we believe that many of them marked themselves as Republican due to the economic and financial questions surrounding business regulation and taxes, but in general, their actual views due to the overall political ideology of both parties tended to be Democratic. So that led to our conclusion that liberal social views are shared between the majority of participants, regardless of political party affiliation, which we believe will move support towards the Democratic Party in future elections when these American youth reach voting age. So as I said before, this can be applied in the future due to the fact that American youth hold more liberal social views, which may cause them to vote democratically even though they align with Republican Party views, because they believe in these liberal social factors that are new. And if we could go back and change anything in our research, we would have taken out that age qualifier question, because we realized that there are a lot of American high school students who are over the age of 18 and have not yet voted, so we could have had a wider sample size in our high school. And then we also would have switched our scoring method and tried to find something a lot easier, because it took Katie and I a lot of time to individually score every single participant's survey by hand and make sure we didn't have any errors. So we probably could have spent more time with that survey open and gather more sample sizes and not have to dedicate all that time to scoring our participants. So those are our references. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Great, thank you so much for your presentation, Daniela. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask. Yeah, so I guess I was curious as to, so it's like what, you said you use like a Likert scale or something. What other alternatives are there to like construct these scoring metrics? And why did you choose this one specifically?
So before we were gonna go with like how much do you agree, like on a scale of just like a scale type of thing where you like move your little cursor. And also there is methods where it's like 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, but that gives participants the option to stay neutral in that 3 zone or 5 zone. So that wouldn't have helped with our research because it's hard to group them if a lot of participants choose neutrally. So that's why we decided to go with that Likert scale, which gives them no opportunity to pick none of the groups or to pick a party that isn't necessarily widespread in America, because unfortunately it is between just the Democratic and Republican Party. So we wanted to analyze trends in those groups and not the little mini parties that appear every once in a while.
Gotcha. And then do you have any ideas as to how that might have changed like in the past, few months due to COVID and everything?
So with COVID, I think a lot of things have happened and a lot of people are switching their views based on, also if you add the Black Lives Matter movement right now and everything that's going on also in the time of quarantine, we are seeing a lot more polarization in political parties. So I believe that this movement with minorities might even move more towards the Democratic views, as the Republican Party is showing much more racial polarization in this time, which I think may push away those minorities that were still supporting the Republican Party, and may move people who are against more COVID regulation towards the Republican Party.
Okay, cool. Cool. So with that, we have concluded North America Block 2. Thank you to all the speakers presented. You guys' presentations were fantastic. At this time, if there are any outstanding questions that you guys might want to ask as the audience to anyone, please feel free to go ahead, because we do have a bit of extra time. And then after that, I'm happy to just like stick around until the block ends. So yeah, are there any extra like questions that you guys wanted to ask any of the participants?
I see one right here from William. Can I go ahead and answer
Yeah,
that?
go ahead.
Okay. So Katie and I went through a lot of Pew Research typology quizzes, which show you what party you align with based on questions we asked. And we tried to make sure we split it between social, in terms of homosexuality, abortion, things we thought that were a big kind of topic right now in these current years. We also included the legalization of marijuana. We made sure to have some financial questions, economics, business regulation, taxes, to kind of get a holistic view of the person's political ideology and not just in a certain category. So we tried to get every aspect of life in there to make it as accurate as possible.
Okay, cool. Are there any other questions for anyone? Going once, going twice. Okay, great. So with that, we have concluded North America Block 2. Thank you so much to everyone, and we will be ending the session now. Have a great day, guys.